sir.
All right. So welcome to this edition of Wisdom Wednesday. Rohan Shukla and Stefan Duvier. These are our MYM partners. I'll just let them introduce themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So Stefan and I have a business called MYM, where we basically specialize in really just movement mechanics and getting people sort of to the roots of of human movement. Focusing specifically on breathing mechanics, body posture, alignment, foot function, really just areas that tend to get overlooked in traditional training programs and just by the industry in general. So we've been bringing a lot of light to that sort of with our business and the clients that we train. For some background on myself, I went to Haverford College in Philadelphia. I was a two-sport athlete in basketball and track and field there. Worked a lot with the strength and conditioning program at school as well. Dealt with sort of a lot of the classic issues that we see with college athletes just from an overtraining and injury perspective. At the end of my senior track season, ended up getting a pretty bad knee injury. I tore a bunch of ligaments in my left knee. Around that same time period, actually met Stefan and saw a lot of the work that he was doing sort of in the wellness and training space. We ended up sort of collaborating and kind of given our similar backgrounds with sports and with injury history, kind of developed this system. Again, that's really just centered around getting people to be the smoothest, most fluid, and most pain-free as possible. So, been a really cool experience and super excited to be here tonight.
Yep. Guys, I just thought Rohan did such a good job introducing me, but
we'll give your background, your personal background.
Yeah. So similar to Rohan, I was a two-sport athlete in college. I went to Tufts University in Boston. I did basketball and track. Had a lot of the classic injuries and ailments that any jumper would have: jumper's knee, ankle sprain, back pain, all that type of stuff. And it kind of just built on each other. All the injuries until I had a sports hernia surgery. So it's a little tear in the bottom quadrant of your torso. That's super painful when you're training, but when you're resting, you take a couple days off, it gets better. But once you get back into training, it's just painful again. So I ended up getting a surgery, and that was really a turning point in how I viewed movement and training in general. In these last couple of years, I really learned how mindfulness really is a huge aspect of any aspect of anything. So especially movement, it's just really important to learn to be aware of the different functions of the body and how the body really just relates to itself. So your injuries is what led up to Mind Your Movement, essentially.
In some sense, it was definitely a catalyst, I think, in just being more open-minded to sort of like alternative methods of training, or just realizing that the traditional strength and conditioning model just has a ton of holes in it. I was very proficient in the weight room, consistently the best lifter on all the teams I'd ever been a part of, and by like any sort of traditional societal standards, like very, very sort of like weight room proficient, but it just didn't have great carryover into athletics. I never really reached my full potential in running or in jumping or just really even injury prevention in general. I was constantly hurt, never felt great. And I think getting injured and like really being in like that dire situation sort of opened my mind to the fact that this method might not be the best. Clearly it wasn't working that well if I was getting hurt and not even performing that well. So it really, I think, was a catalyst just for opening my mind to additional ways of training, and then just starting to explore the different kind of facets of the human body and of training in general that just get overlooked. And that's a lot of what MYM is really about, is just kind of bridging that gap and filling in those holes that you tend to just neglect in most programming.
Yeah, I think for me, I've always been super interested in the human body, physiology, psychology, and the different just systems of the body, and really learning how they kind of mesh together. I think in the healthcare industry today, like the way the body is viewed is just so fragmented and
Yeah.
kind of over complexified. And I think our mind your movement system really gets to the root of those different functions of how they kind of interrelate with each other. And we've really been able to find, I think, the universal patterns of movement and of wellness. And we really just want to share that message with people.
Yeah, so I mean, and for some context for folks that are probably joining a little bit later, we started working with Gio, I think about 3 weeks ago or so, like getting him sort of integrated into the system, like, you know, kind of exposing him to our methods and sort of what we're doing. Just kind of given that Gio's also had somewhat of an injury history, also has, you know, dealt with a torn ACL before and had some frustrations with, you know, the strength and conditioning regimen that he was on. So, you know, that's kind of how we started this kind of partnership in the first place too. Just kind of given Gio's position and the fact that like we work with athletes of that stature all the time.
For sure.
So maybe if you could talk a little bit about like your experience working with us, kind of what you felt, how it differs from what you've seen before. I think that could be really cool.
Yeah.
All right. Before I dive into that, what do you guys feel like is the biggest hole that you guys feel? Like in terms of, because you said like the usual training regimen is has a lot of holes and it has a lot of gaps in like training and what you guys do. So what do you guys feel would be the biggest value added that you have versus a strength and conditioning coach?
I think the biggest thing for me is just bringing awareness into what you do. So people will pound out mindless reps in the gym, like bicep curls, bench press, etc. And it's not even to say that those exercises are bad, but the way in which they're done with no real consideration for the different parts of the body and really the different systems of the body, because these different organ systems like digestion, your mental processes, waste removal, they all work together to get any job done. And I know it sounds complex right now, but when you just bring awareness to those certain aspects of your body, you just make your training way more effective and safer and healthier for your body.
I think to add a little bit more specifics to that, I think two areas that we focus a lot on that you won't see with most strength and conditioning programs are your body alignment and your breathing mechanics. It's a huge thing that we focus on. Like, sure, you could do a squat, you could do a deadlift, but understanding sort of how to properly align and set yourself up, what is the correct position to be in, and how do you sort of breathe through these movements, and how do you carry that over into more dynamic movements like jumping or sprinting. Those are super, super important concepts that are just really overlooked. Like, it's all about like sets and reps and pounding that you see kind of in the industry, people just going really hard, but not really understanding kind of the nuances and fluidity that really should be kind of inherent with that training as well. So I think it's really just the mindset and the approach that we bring just by focusing on these kind of overlooked areas that have direct implications on your pain levels or your lack of pain levels, on transferability onto the court or the field, and really just the effectiveness of your workouts and how well you can recover and kind of mitigating the inflammation and damage that you do to your body while exercising.
Okay. I have another question. So, did I tell you guys that Shikari is a powerlifter?
That's what's up.
Okay, that makes sense.
So Shikari is a powerlifter. So for everyone that's joining us, this is their first time meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Shikari, how do you feel, you know, necessarily being a powerlifter and hearing these, not contradictory, but it's just not
Non-traditional.
non-traditional?
Yeah.
Well, for me personally, my coach that I go to, we do focus more so on breathing mechanics, because like in order to obviously get through the lift, you need to be able to like hone in on like
Brace properly.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
So sometimes I work with and without my belt, because he kind of wants for me to be able to build that internal belt that's already basically
create
there.
that pressure.
Right.
Exactly.
torso.
So that like I can definitely attest to is like something that has been like worked on. However, with the other forms of like foot placement and like alignment and like things of that nature, those aren't really focused on as much. Technique, yes, like get your hips here, make sure that your lats are tight, like or keep tension in the body throughout the entire lift. Like those things are like pointed out, but like the smaller aspects of
Yeah.
it, not so much. And I do feel like that's really important because it's the smaller pieces that help to.
Exactly. And then especially is like, I mean, just by nature of powerlifting, as you load up the bar, like a small issue can manifest itself in a much more damaging way if you have 400 pounds on something.
Right, exactly, which is how I ended up with a posterior labrum tear from benching
That makes sense.
improperly. So yeah, because I wasn't loading the weight into my lats, I
Right.
was putting it into my shoulders.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the problem also stems from things getting lost in the translation from like professionals
Yeah.
to the average person just trying to do powerlifting or really any other sport for that matter. I think you will often see that the coaches of these more professional people really have it down, really understand like the root to all of the different movements, to all of the different training aspects. But that again just gets watered down and lost in the translation to the average person.
Right.
Yeah. I think to add to that, like a lot of these really good athletes or lifters or just professionals in the industry, a lot of times aren't even aware of certain things that they do that make them so proficient. And you know, they'll think that what makes them proficient is like another area or something that's not actually true, and then they'll convey that message, and because it like whatever, because they're so good at it, people will follow their advice, but often to their own detriment.
Yeah, that's
Exactly.
real.
And again, that's really another thing that Stefan and I have been stressing with MYM is just trying to make these sort of complex or hidden areas that make some of these athletes so great, just make it crystal clear what they actually are and how anybody can really achieve and understand what those areas are.
Right. So not so much of like, oh well, this works for me, so it should work for you.
Right.
Like no, like finding out
Getting-
like what works with your body specifically.
Yeah, we really analyze all these different movement disciplines, all these different practices as well.
Yeah.
So I specifically like to draw a lot from Eastern practices because they really have it down. They've been around for thousands of years, whereas the Western culture of fitness has been around for like 50 years.
Right.
It's a
Or
very,
Western culture in general. Too.
yeah, Western culture.
It's
in general.
relatively new.
It's
Yeah.
it's behind the rest of the world. So
And it just takes everything else that already exists and tries to oversimplify it.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
like,
yeah.
you know, like a lot of these sort of more mindful or just like holistic practices that come from the East, like we package them up into something as simple as like a turmeric latte and go on with your day.
Or yoga, like
And that just, I mean, that has like real implications in the weight room where you're oversimplifying people's understanding of their own body and rushing through or skipping over important elements that have real impact on their health, but it might not be immediately apparent. Like you could go dunk a basketball right now if, you know, without knowing, you know, all these new things we've been teaching you, but does that mean you should keep doing it that way? It's a separate question.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense.
And just because you said dunking, like let me just dive into me. Like I've been under traditional strength and conditioning coaches for my whole basketball collegiate career, so which is 4 to 5 years now. So especially the difference when I started working with you guys is it's the cues. So I have to dip here, my hips have to be straight, or I have to get deeper or lower in the squat or whatever that may be. So that's where like I found, and then especially just the breathing, just the intention.
Yeah, you all say that's the hardest part of the
Bro, the
workout.
hardest, I'm telling you, like that breathing is the hardest
Not the
part.
first one to say that.
Definitely not. I still think that too.
No, for real, it's really,
Yeah.
it's difficult. So with that, with the MYM training, and wow, what's my train of thought?
You talking about dunking?
Dunking. So with the training, it's been easier. So like even I find myself in practice sometimes, you see what I'm saying, over the last couple of weeks, jumping and doing things off my left leg that I wouldn't normally be able to do, or things that were my left leg's going that sort.
Yeah.
So even jumping off that leg is even easier after just
Yeah.
3 weeks of sessions. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's interesting actually. I mean, this could be a cool kind of side topic to get into just on injuries in general, but how much injuries are really mental, almost more so than anything else. Like when you recover, you still have like thought patterns and like fear associated with different parts of your body, different movements, and different positions to get into.
Especially, my bad.
No, you're good. But basically, like a lot of what we try to do is just by rebuilding that full body sort of connectivity and awareness, you can get over kind of those fears and progressively move past it. And that's cool that you've been able to experience that.
Yeah.
I think it's a super important area. Like, I mean, that's why it's so common for people to injure one side of their body, rehab, and then injure the other side when they come
Klay
back.
Thompson.
Klay Thompson is a great example.
Great example.
Like, and we just had a phone call actually before this where someone was telling us how, like, this is earlier today, they tore their right ACL, recovered, tore their left ACL, recovered, and tore their right Achilles.
Yeah.
3 consecutive years, new injury each year. Like, it's a very common thing that you'll see everyone from the Klay Thompsons and the highest level athletes of the world to just regular people in high school. So, I mean, I think that's such an important part of like training that gets overlooked, is sort of the mental associations and stigmas that you might have with certain like patterns and motions.
Yeah, and kind of to bridge off that, the breathing element of our MYM system, that's why it's so important, because breathing is literally our lifeline. Breathing tells our brain, our body, whether we're safe or not. When our breathing becomes chaotic, breathing into our chest, into our neck, that's how we know we're kind of in a fight or flight situation. When our breathing gets grounded and relaxed from our belly, from our torso, then we're nice and calm. So if we can apply that same kind of idea to our different movements and the progression from an injured state to a non-injured state, then you're going to be a lot better off, because then you're going to be able to progressively tell your body that you're safe in these different positions. So you just start off, for example, standing on one leg. Okay, I can breathe in this position. My brain and my body knows that I'm super safe. All right, now let's move on to a squat. Let's move on to a jump. Let's move on to a run, all the way up to the most specific task, which is your sport or whatever task you got to do. So just really finding that comfort and that safeness in every single movement in a systematic fashion.
I definitely agree. And just to touch on what you were saying earlier about the mental aspect, especially for me coming off my ACL the first time, it was, you see what I'm saying? It was, especially going through the rehab, that was all mental. Like, I remember the first day he was like, the very first exercise they make you do once you tear your ACL is you have to do like you're seated and you're like your legs laid out, and it's like all he tells you to do, or all he told me to do, was flex my quad. And I'm sitting there looking at him like, I can't flex my quad. Like, what are you talking about, flex my quad? Like, I haven't moved this thing in like a month. Like, what are you talking about? So he said flex his quad. I'm looking at him like, I can't do it. And he's like, you can do it. Like, he's just telling me like, you can do it. Do it. So then I'm sitting there struggling to even, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, even to find the strength to pull it together, but it's mental.
Yeah.
Like, he's telling me I can do it, and I'm looking at him like, yo, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, what do you... And then the day that he told me to bend it,
Hilarious.
I remember like he said like if my knee was like this, he went to bend my knee, like he was trying to go like that. I'm looking at him like, yo, what are you doing? Like, yo, this thing hasn't, like, I haven't done this in months. Like, what are you talking about? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and so imagine that on a smaller scale. So like an injury that's not as bad as an ACL tear, we have all this trauma that's associated with the way that we run, the way that we sit all day, and it just shuts off certain muscles, gets certain muscles tight, and we just lose consciousness and awareness of our body. And obviously it has it impedes on our performance.
For sure.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely mental. That's why, like, especially when I was working with you guys, and it's like it's mind your movement, so it's like going into it, I already know it's gonna be like
mentally strenuous.
But it's like when you get in there and it's actually just like, all right, let me breathe like this, and let me focus, and let me put my body this way and contort this way. It's like it's a complete different ballgame.
Could you tell people a little bit about your experience just with like your mental sort of clarity and how you think and just your focus for the rest of the day after a session with us too? Because that's like another big thing that we focus on is kind of leveraging like your breathing and your posture and using movement to make your mind sort of more acute, more aware, and you're able to get sort of more work done. I don't know if you've experienced that at all with your school, your projects, but that's definitely like a big thing stuff that I focus on too.
I feel like
Or you just been spoiled. You get the juice in the hot tub.
I definitely see an impact. I feel like me personally, I'm mindful in general. Like like before, like just as an overall. But with this, it's made me more mindful of more acute things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like bending my knee or like when we were doing the lunges that one day.
Mm-hmm.
It was like I know how to do a lunge, and I like my form is essentially good by any strength coaches. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Any strength coaches measure, but
Right.
like it's like all right, hold on, let me flex my quad, not quad. Let me flex my calf. Let me tilt this way. Let me fix this. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's like I feel like I've become more precise
Mhm.
when I've been working with you guys about my movements.
Cool. That's what's
makes
up.
sense.
Cool. So do we want to transition into the topic of the day, the lower back pain?
I was just about to do it.
Yeah.
So you gotta take full.
Cool. So, I mean, I guess for this topic, we kind of figured that this would be something very widely applicable, obviously, given how prevalent low back pain is. Something that I personally have a lot of experience with. Like I had a bad history of back spasms and lower back pain kind of in high school and through college, had physical therapy for it, had some issues with discs in my lower spine. And I was never really able to sort of get to a place where I felt like my lower back pain was completely gone and that I was strong and sturdy and like it just wasn't an issue anymore until I really started adopting these MYM principles. So I think some of the tips that we're going to share and just some of the knowledge in general, we want to make it sort of kind of as clear as possible, things that you can immediately start implementing in your life, just from how you sit, how you breathe while you're sitting, different different cues to sort of keep in mind while you're typing on your computer. Just a lot of simple changes that you can make, just following those same underlying principles that can have some really good impact just on how you feel, even in a matter of 1 or 2 days. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add before diving in.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me.
So,
I just want to make things as accessible as possible for people so that, like, bro.
Why don't you kind of talk through properly aligned, and then maybe give people like a visual on how to properly sit, what are the right chairs to use, where should their hips be in relation to their legs, different things to add to your chair, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start off with good posture. I feel like a lot of the times people hear good posture and they'll associate that with sticking their chest out super far, and that's not necessarily what we're looking for, because then you're kind of not really taking the whole spine into account. So I like to think about it more so from a complete perspective. So envision this: you're sitting down in your chair or you're standing up. You got the base of your spine, your tailbone, and you kind.
Like before you really start.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want you you see like how I want both of you guys to apply everything you're about to say to how me and Shikari are sitting right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's an interaction.
So it's not like
Yeah.
you see what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so taking Shikari, for instance,
It's bad.
yeah, I mean, so
Movement.
I don't know if the camera angle could kind of show you guys this, but she's leaned forward a little bit.
Maybe turn sideways. You can see the angle. Yeah, it's probably.
This is how it was.
Yeah.
Just like
So
that.
this is better.
Yeah, so you can kind of see a little bit of dip in her lower spine right here. So the way I like to think about it, so she's sitting down right now. Feel even pressure on both sides of your butt. Let everything kind of sink down into the chair. And then from there, you see how that already kind of leans her back?
Yeah.
And then from there, you want to think about the very base of your spine. You want to think about that being pulled away from the top of the back of your head. So you're just going to be able to create space in between each of your individual vertebrae. And then from there, you'll notice a lot of people, when I say to elongate the spine, they'll stick their chest out and kind of let their ribs flare. But I want you to keep your ribs down, kind of locked in with your pelvis. And at the same time, again, keeping that elongation up through the spine, up through the top of the back of the head. And then from there, it's a lot easier to breathe. It's a lot easier to,
Feels better.
yeah, it feels better. And so that's really the basis of it. Sit down like that, do your exercise like that, talk to people like that, go through your life activities in that good posture. And I think the training regimens that Rohan and I do with MYM really teach you how to challenge your body from like a loading and intensity standpoint, and then apply those principles into lighter, less loading standpoints. So like when we're sitting, for example.
Yeah, no, the point about having both of your, like, feeling both sides of your butt sink into the chair is super important. Like, you'll see with a lot of people, they'll favor one hip more than the other. I still do that sometimes when I'm trying to work on it. That's why a lot of people associate sitting with getting really tight hip flexors, because usually you're going to be hunched over, favor one side or the other. Yeah, then obviously your hip flexors are going to tense up because you're not sitting properly. But what you'll find is if you let that pressure sink straight into the ground, straight down, and it's even and distributed, and then you follow those other points that Steph mentioned about like the rib cage alignment and whatnot, you won't feel that same tightness in your hip flexor, and that's a good cue, just a form of biofeedback on the fact that you are starting to sit correctly now. It shouldn't be painful.
Yeah, definitely not. And then so getting into more specifics about sitting, because I know quarantine, a lot of people working from home, a lot of people just more sedentary in general. One of the biggest things you can do is elevating your hips above your knees so that your lower leg kind of forms a little slant. So what that's gonna do is just take a little bit of the pressure off of your hips and divert it through the rest of your core, and just make sure that you're in a stronger, more stable position.
And you'll find it's naturally a lot easier to stay upright in that position too, just like the higher you're already up. Like it's more akin to standing.
Yeah, so basically you could put down like a pad or like even books I like to use sometimes to just kind of sit on top of, so that your knees, the video's not really gonna be able to see this, but so that your knees kind of just like, I don't even know how to explain it, but your feet are kind of behind you in line with your torso.
Can I move the table? Like, can I move that one?
Yeah.
Powerlifter?
You can ask for my services, so.
Yeah, so I don't have anything elevating my chair right now. Yeah, I looked already, but it's alright. Yeah, so I don't have anything to elevate my hips, but typically I try to stack like books or whatever, a pillow under my butt, and then kind of have my feet back here so that my knees, instead of being up here in line with my hips, they kind of sink down, and you kind of see how that just makes it easier to kind of align yourself when you get the knees down below. It's just more of an ergonomic position that's just like better and safer for your body.
So what would you recommend for someone, like, let's say they like drive cars for a living, or like they're a truck driver, they do Uber or whatever have you. Let's say they have like bucket seats. At that point, the knees are coming above the hips, and it's like you're here.
Yeah. Well, I think some cars have that bottom seat are able to be adjustable to kind of raise them a little bit. Yeah, exactly. So like I try and say find that position that I just spoke about as best as you can in your car. It's not gonna be perfect, and that's why I always recommend people don't sit down for that long. I mean, even if you're a driver, there's breaks in between passengers if you do Uber or something. So just get around, walk around for 5 minutes. Like even that is better than nothing.
Yeah.
Even that is better than sitting for 2, 3, 4 hours straight, you know?
For sure.
Yeah. Do you want to speak at all to sort of addressing training with lower back pain? Because I think another thing too is, in addition to just working on your posture, which is super important, I think there's a lot of long-term sort of muscular bodily imbalances that are created as a result of poor sitting, and just sitting in general, and like being less active than our ancestors were. Could you talk about maybe like areas to focus on in the gym, or specific types of exercises that people can do if they have really serious lower back pain that's like preventing them from training, but they still want to be active and kind of start working to address those imbalances?
Yeah, so I would say to start on the floor. And to give you a little bit more insight into that, it's all about breathing. Breathing is the name of the game here. So the same muscles that you use to breathe are actually used to hold good posture and alignment in your spine. So if your breathing is off, then your postural alignment is going to be off. If your postural alignment is off, you are probably going to have low back pain or some kind of pain somewhere in your chain. So every workout session that we have, whether it's us training clients through our MYM program or our individual training, Rohan and I, we start every program with breathing. Gio will tell you, and so if you learn to direct your breath at every corner of your torso, a lot of people just breathe like this, kind of raising their rib cage, letting their ribs flare out like this. But if you're able to keep that rib cage locked down and in line with the rest of your body, in line, locked down with your pelvis, as you take that inhale, you're gonna fill up different parts of your torso. You're gonna be able to fill up your low back, your upper back, your belly, your chest. So a big misconception I think people have with breathing is that it should only be in the belly, but really it should be in your whole torso, because as Shakari was talking about before with powerlifting, that's gonna create that intra-abdominal pressure. That's gonna create a stable base for you literally to do any movement off of. If you don't have that stable base in breath through your torso, then it's gonna kind of be like when you stomp on a can that's empty. It's gonna crush under the weight of your foot. But if you got a full can that hasn't been opened yet, it still has all the liquid in it, you press with the same pressure, it's not gonna break, it's not gonna collapse. So the same thing can be applied to any of your movements to kind of remediate that low back pain.
Yeah, that's like the actually applicable explanation of why people tell you to get your core stronger when you have lower back pain. Like, it's not just as simple as like doing planks and sit-ups. Like, a lot of these sort of breathing techniques and focus on that in your exercise will really wake up and teach you how to use those smaller, more intrinsic muscles of the core, like your diaphragm, like your transverse abdominis. Really just areas that we don't normally train but have very serious implications on your core strength, and as a result help sort of mitigate the load that the lower back has to take.
I would say that's true core strength.
That's what actual core strength
is
right?
learning how to create that pressure and breathe while you're in that proper alignment.
For sure.
That's
like
what
this happens to me and
really
Gio still. We'll be like shaking like little kids when we do it, right?
Hey, working out with y'all, that's the first time I ever sweat from breathing.
Yeah, that's real.
Like, I didn't even, like, when y'all was telling me beforehand, like, oh, the breathing, and I'm like, oh, I know how to breathe. Like, that's not a problem. Like, I've been doing this my whole life.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Then, like, we actually got on the floor, started breathing, and I was like,
yeah.
feeling the sweat come down. I'm like, all right, this is.
Yeah, and I mean, that just goes to show you how far removed people are from something as simple as breathing.
It's fundamental to our existence.
And so that's why it's one of the basic principles of MYM, because we find that breathing is literally the root of any movement, but people are so out of touch with breathing, they get lost in the sauce with all these other complexities, all these other training modalities, but they forget the baseline, which is your breath.
So would you say that breathing is probably the biggest hole that you guys fill with MYM?
Thought patterns come first.
Yeah,
I think thought patterns come first, because without the right train of thinking, like your breathing is gonna be off.
Yeah.
But I do think breathing, for its ability to connect the mind and the body, I think that's what we typically use it for. Why it's so effective.
Gotcha. So it's more of like a change the thought process, and then thus the behavior will follow.
Exactly, because thoughts literally lead to your different emotions and what you feel, your feelings lead to behavior, and then your behaviors lead to action. So you can think of the same thing in terms of movement.
Unless anybody on the live had any questions, did you guys have anything else?
I think for that topic, I think that's plenty for people to go off of for now. Just like focusing on that, like full breathing into your whole torso, you know, sitting maybe with getting the hips elevated on a higher surface, just thinking about that positioning, and just generally being more aware of, like, you know, if you're typing, you're feeling really stressed out, just remember to pause for a second, unwind, and just bring more attention to that throughout the day is going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, there's really no reason to sit at your computer super stressed. I mean, I know it's a bit easier said than done, but if you literally just take 5 minutes in between bouts of like maybe like 45 or 60 minutes, 5 minutes to think and bring awareness to your breath. Where is my breath in my torso? You're gonna make a shit ton of difference in not only your productivity, but your quality of life and how you're feeling for that day.
Yeah, I mean, it has tangible impacts on, you know, how well you're able to perform at your job or in school too. Like, the more efficiently you can sort of distribute oxygen throughout, you know, every cell in your body, the more you're able to more you can get done, the more focus you're gonna have, the more energy you're gonna have.
Every system is gonna work better.
Yeah, everything's just gonna work more efficiently, so you get more bang for your buck with every, you know, every hour, every minute that you put into to the task at hand. So, in addition to having, like, you know, pain implications, it will also make you a more productive worker. So there's really no reason to kind of hold out on it.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anything else, Gio?
And on that note, this is going to wrap up this edition of Wisdom Wednesday. Shakari, do you have anything else?
I actually did have a question.
Yeah, for sure.
In regards to like imbalances, so let's say, well, I'm just going to use myself for instance. When doing single leg movements, I feel it more so immediately like in my right leg. My left leg lags a little bit. And I can also kind of just like feel the difference between like my right leg gets tired faster than the left one. So do you think that breathing also translates over to imbalances within the body? Or is it more so if you just use your right leg more for everything, or its dominant side? So
I think breathing can definitely be the foundation of your imbalances, because if you think about it, how the lungs work, you can really pinpoint the awareness to the breath entering certain parts of your lungs. So if you really think about it, if I brought you through a session, I would probably bring you to take your awareness to those deeper parts of the lungs. Are you able to get your breath all the way down there? And if not, then that can kind of lead to the discrepancy because remember, you need that breath to be the stable base.
right.
If one side doesn't have that stability that it needs through breath, then it's going to be off in the mechanics.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because I even saw that when you mentioned like with getting the equal sides like down to the ground, like I realized I was like, oh wait, I'm leaning on my right side more, like maybe I should.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
yeah, for sure.
Definitely. Cool.
That's all I have.
So, yeah.
Cool. Well, also check us out on social media for sure. Stefan's handle is air.duvi, D-U-V-I. Mine's air.shukla, S-H-U-K-L-A. If you got any questions, you're good. But yeah, check us out on social media. Gio can post our handles after the session as well. But we hope to connect with you guys, and I hope you found this informative.
Yeah.
For sure. Thank you guys for being here.
Yeah, thanks for
Greatly
having us.
appreciate it. All the knowledge that you guys spewed. It's definitely more than I've learned in my 4 or 5 years with these strength and conditioning coaches. So.
That's what I'd like to hear.
Absolutely.
And we'll stay tuned till the next one. We'll keep you guys updated.
All right, y'all. Peace out.
See
Good
you
night.
guys.
Signing off.
That was cool.